United, WFC.
Good evening and welcome to All United WFC with me, Matt Crane. We've got the Women's Football Chat Show, and tonight we've got three guests joining me. I've got Gareth, I've got Tom, and I've got Paul. How are we all?
Yeah,
very
good,
well.
thanks,
how are you all?
Evening.
Yep, not too bad, thank you. So tonight then, obviously, important topic as we've all seen in the news sort of the last couple of weeks. Coventry United, there's been quite a lot going on. Developments even as soon as sort of yesterday and Monday. So we're going to be talking about that in today's show. I think it's important we cover it, obviously, for the greater good of women's football and obviously for Coventry as well. But first, before we start, there's been obviously a couple of things today that have dropped announcement-wise in terms of games being postponed. The first one to be called off due to COVID in the West Ham camp was obviously West Ham versus Man United. And I believe a couple of minutes ago as well that the Chelsea game was postponed too. Tom, did you have anything? Did you say the potential for maybe more that you heard?
That's right, yeah. So in the last few minutes, as you just alluded to there, Chelsea versus Tottenham has been called off on Friday night. But we're hearing from multiple sources as well that there is a bit of a COVID outbreak at Everton as well. So we understand they've requested to have their game on Saturday against Aston Villa also postponed. Don't know if that's definitely the case yet or not, but I would expect to get some clarity on that one way or the other tomorrow. But yeah, so it could be a third WSL game. And just in general, across the WSL and Championship, we heard today from the FA that there have been 40 positive cases recorded in the last week. So that's obviously a fairly high number, which is a worry for a lot of the fixtures, I think, in general. And in reality, because of the number of cases in the public, we are going to see more games like that happen in the men's game, more games impacted as players come back from their Christmas meetups with family and other things like that.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's where we're at in terms of women's football then. Fingers crossed, obviously, that all are affected, are well soon, and we wish them all the best. I'm going to start then, obviously, with the main topic as we promised viewers, Coventry. So what I'll do is sort of start with the story. Obviously, we heard it was the 23rd of December. That there was going to be issues and that the sort of holding company, or parent company, if you like, had put Coventry United or looking to put Coventry United into liquidation. The liquidation was due to happen yesterday, 4th of January. And this sort of, well, there wasn't really a statement as such. There was a lot of sort of outrage from fans, from players, from media, everybody sort of all over the women's game. We eventually got, I hate to call it a statement because it was a pretty pathetic attempt, but we got some sort of statement with further information. And then after that, it was sort of, we found out that players were told via Zoom that their contracts would be terminated when the club went into liquidation, and they were kind of free to find other clubs. What I'll do, Tom, obviously, because you've written quite a few pieces on this, I'll get you to sort of go from the start, really, sort of following on from what I've said, and just talk to me about sort of what you'd written.
Of course. Well, yeah, as I'm sure many listeners I remember 2 days before Christmas. In fact, it was, as I understand, it was actually the night of the 22nd of December that the players received an email from the club calling them into a video meeting the following morning, on the morning of the 23rd, when, as you mentioned a moment ago, they were told over video call that the club was going to be going into voluntary liquidation, which is obviously a huge shock for the players and the staff right before Christmas. Well, at any time of year, it would be shocking. And I think they all felt quite upset about the way that was handled, to be honest with you. As I understand it, they weren't allowed to ask any questions. The announcement was sort of made via video, and then the call ended, which is obviously a bit of a difficult way to learn that news. But yeah, so then there was obviously a period where everybody thought the club was going to be formally liquidated on the 4th of January, and players and other employees at the club started looking for other jobs, understandably, as you would do. And then it was around Saturday night I first started to hear from a few different people that there was a possible twist, in that there was a very credible interested party who wanted to come in and buy the club. So and that all happened quite quickly. I believe actually I hope I'm not going too long-winded here with this answer, but I believe that Laura Harvey, former Arsenal manager, posted a tweet to promote the crowdfunder that had been set up to help the players. And one of the people that responded to that call to action was the CEO of the Midlands-based energy company, Energy Angels, Lewis Taylor, who is a businessman whose company already sponsor Wolves women and been quite active promoters and supporters of the women's game for a while. And Mr. Taylor, he saw that issue being raised and thought to himself, well, I can help here. And in an interview that he gave to the Telegraph, he said that he felt because he could afford to help, it was just the right thing to do, that he was so sort of emotionally struck by the seriousness of the situation for the club and wanted to help. He made quite a quick approach to the club to try and say, I want to help, I want to buy the football club. And it was difficult to get that done because Monday was bank holiday, so not much could really happen on Monday. But yesterday, on Tuesday the 4th, between the existing owners and the liquidators and Lewis Taylor, they struck a deal. So in terms of the football club, it meant that the football club wasn't liquidated yesterday. And Lewis Taylor will now buy the club effectively for £1, but he will take on the existing debts. And we understand he'll invest around £250,000 to get the club through to the end of the season, pay all the wages that are outstanding, and start planning for the future. And his long-term ambitions are the WSL.
Yeah, I mean, and Paul as well, you do some work for Coventry Radio Plus. How have kind of the last couple of weeks been from your point of view, covering the club, and how did you kind of find out about this? And you wrote an article as well called "The Nightmare Before Christmas," where you kind of summarise the ongoings as well. So, do you just want to talk a bit about kind of the whole debacle from your perspective?
Well, it was strange from my perspective because apart from anything else, I had actually done a live game because we do the live games here in Coventry for the home games. We started doing that this season, and there was absolutely no hint of any of this. Like, obviously, a lot of the players have said, we were surprised, we were whatever else, and normally, I don't know, because Tom's obviously got much more experience than me in terms of with women's football and football journalism. Normally you get some sort of a sense around the club that things aren't well. And there was absolutely none of that whatsoever in Coventry. I mean, I was talking to Jay Bradford, the manager, post-game, and Katie Wilkinson, the captain. And all the talk was, we need to have a sensible Christmas. We need to take care of ourselves. And we're coming back early to try and steal a march on the rest of the FA Women's Championship. And we feel like we're starting to build something here. So, From my perspective, and I get the impression from the team's perspective as well, it was, as I said in the article, it literally almost cut them off at the knees completely. And the first I actually heard of it, I mean, I thought you'd think commenting the team you might have heard something, but the first I actually heard of it was tweets from Natalie of All for United as well, talking about the show that they did. And then obviously Tom started talking about it. Emma Sanders at the BBC started talking about it. And then I had people sending me messages going, have you heard anything? And I'm sat here going, you what? So I sent a message to the club and said, are you aware these rumours are going out? Didn't get a response. Then got in touch with the media person at the club, Connor, who I have a good relationship with, and said, what's going on here? And he's like, it's all true. The sponsors have pulled the funding. We're finished. And the players got told today, and that was it. So it really was out of a clear blue sky, if you like.
Yeah, I think on that then, because obviously, like you say, I mean, I was actually at the final game as it was with Natalie and a few people that we know were Aston Villa fans. And like you say, speaking to players afterwards, we were chatting to them and they were exactly the same, see you in the new year. Thanks for coming to the game. Things like that, just like you say, normal things where nobody appeared to have an indication. If you looked at sort of body language and nobody was down, nobody was saying, oh, well, there might be something happening. We don't know anything like that. It was like you say, completely out of the blue. But I want to stick with yourself, Paul, then. Obviously, not just you, but players and staff as well, and everybody that sort of works at the club. What was that like then, sort of mentally, having your team and, seeing friends and people go through what they went through at the time? I'm assuming was obviously very, very tough.
I mean, I wouldn't want to speak for the players, obviously, because covering them, I haven't got
yeah, sure.
I've got a journalistic relationship, but not a close one. But for me personally, this group of players, and I've put it on Twitter. If you hadn't covered them every week, you wouldn't get a full sense of it, because obviously from the outside you look at the results, you see that there's been issues getting ready and lots of new players coming in, but seeing them every week, this was a team, you know, that you got the feeling would go through walls for each other, who were loving being at Coventry United. And several players talking about it who joined from other clubs were saying to me, you know, this is night and day compared to some of the bigger clubs that we previously played for. We feel like we're building something here. And to have all that taken away, and to have these people who I, you know, built a relationship with personally, as well as obviously a fan of the team and covering them, go through that and thinking just like that it was gone, was horrendous. So I can't imagine what it would have been like for the players themselves, because I wasn't actually losing my job. I was just losing a section of my coverage. So for them personally, I can't imagine what it would be like. But I think their tweets on Twitter, like Liv Clark saying it was heartbreaking to come in and find out you've got no job, the training the day before Christmas, I think they made it clear, and it was just horrendous. And I think anyone who's ever had a sports team struggle or ever lost anything massively important to them can kind of relate to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Tom, I want to obviously bring you in on this then, because, you know, we talk about sustainability, and that's something I want to get onto, but obviously it's difficult, isn't it? And I imagine you were as surprised as everybody else, because, you know, we lost, I think, as recently as I can remember, sort of Notts County, and that was, you know, the day before the spring series was due to start. You know, there's been financial issues at clubs like sort of Yeovil and Sunderland, but what your initial thought, maybe more just so the way it broke rather than anything else, you know, because it's quite rare to see players actually put something out as well before the club itself comes out and says something.
Yes, that side of it was quite rare, but I suppose the main thing that surprised me, and I think many others involved with this, is that the club sort of, I don't know how I phrase this, they almost sort of skipped a step. We were kind of, you would expect in a circumstance like this that the club might have gone into administration or appointed an administrator whose role would effectively have been to quite actively search for a buyer and to more slowly and gradually reduce outgoings and reduce costs and sell players, or try to sell players, to more slowly go through the process of the club potentially being wound up. But that move to go straight to appointing liquidators on a voluntary basis felt, I think, to many people involved, quite drastic. And actually, as it turns out, fortunately for the survival of the football club, a buyer has come forward, but that doesn't normally happen in the process where liquidators have been appointed. And in a statement today, the liquidators BK Plus sort of alluded to that. They were very glad to help end that process, but I think from the tone of it, they sounded sort of quite pleasantly surprised, but surprised that had happened, because it doesn't normally happen. So I guess I unfortunately have not been able to hear from the current outgoing owners and shareholders since this all happened. We have asked to speak to them, but I found that side of it quite surprising. But I think for the players, even though the club has now survived, I think there are quite a lot of the playing squad who still feel really hurt by that. And let's not forget that, unless I'm misinformed, as of today, the wages haven't been paid for December yet. I know the new owner wants to do that as soon as he physically can, but the kind of existing club, as I'm assured, haven't paid December's wages. So it's not been an easy time for the players and staff at all.
I think it's interesting you say that, Tom, about the skipping in the step, because I think that was something that shocked me personally when I was looking into it. And I think it surprised a few of your colleagues as well, because I saw Catherine Batt, when she shared the statement from the administrators, where the shareholders in question were basically blaming Brexit and COVID and playing behind closed doors. She pointed out the team actually went professional after all, like with crowds back in the stadium. And it was interesting because obviously I don't know lots about the financials, so I can't kind of speak to anything, but looking at the company in question, the main sponsors, who seem to be the people who have basically pulled the funding and caused the problem initially, the money was there somewhere. It looks like they just didn't see it worth spending on Coventry United, or they didn't see the money, their return for the investment. You can't speculate on any of their motives, whatever. And obviously, as businessmen, they've got the right to do what they like. But I think this wasn't a case where we've seen in some cases of, the main sponsors having no money. I think it was a case of a choice being made, whether they didn't think the team were profitable, whether they didn't think the figures that they were putting in were sustainable. And it was also surprising, like you say, that there was no whisper of any of this coming out anywhere. No whisper of the club being for sale. No whisper of the club going into administration. And I think that was the thing that raised the anger and the shock of, like you say, some of the players were shocked by it. Although I think they want to stay together as a team. So obviously I'm hoping, covering them, that they do want to come back as a group if they have the money proved to be there for at least the rest of this season. I know some of them have got interest from other clubs. You've spoken about it. Other people have spoken about it. But it was the sheer speed of it, like you say, Tom. It's just how they skipped the step and went, right, okay, we're effectively killing off this football club very quickly without almost even trying to save it.
Yeah, that felt quite unusual to me. It does leave us now in such a complicated situation where with regards to potential points deduction, and depending on who you speak to, you hear quite different views on what has or hasn't happened. And the rules are fairly sort of complicated, but they are there in black and white. The rules are there for the various parties to kind of argue over. I think people involved at the club are very hopeful that the fact that liquidation didn't happen on Tuesday will mean that they have not triggered a insolvency event, and therefore they might not be at risk of a points deduction. But then when you talk to other people with sort of knowledge of these sort of situations, their suspicion is that actually a points deduction is almost inevitable, or that at least that the FA will have to look into it. And the example, and I appreciate that liquidation and administration are different things, and this is quite an unprecedented situation in the WSL and Championship history, certainly the one we've just had. But just as an example, in 2019, Yeovil received a points deduction, and that was on the basis that they had stated their intent to appoint an administrator, and they actually never appointed an administrator. They never actually went into administration, but by telling the FA that they intended to appoint one in the coming days and weeks, that was enough for the FA to give them a 10-point deduction. Now, in that instance, they never went into administration because the FA were able to come to an agreement with the blessing of the other clubs as well to give Yeovil some of the following season's money in advance to kind of help them finish the season and make sure that issue was averted. But the reason I mention that is because they had a deduction for just merely for stating their intention to appoint administrators. So the fact that liquidators were actually appointed in this case is why people are fearing that there may well be a 10-point deduction. So that's I guess a complicated situation. I think that given the new owners, or the soon-to-be new owners of Coventry United are none of it. It was no fault of theirs. I think they might have an extremely good case at appealing such a deduction if there was such a deduction. So I think this could run on for a little while. But yeah, definitely this kind of isn't all resolved at the moment. I think there's quite a long way to go on quite a few aspects around this.
A question kind of that's in the chat from John Hume kind of mentions about trying to sell the club before going into liquidation, and the insolvency practitioner mentioned in their statement that they notified the FA and instructed BK Plus to seek a buyer for the company back in November, but there were kind of no offers coming forward. Is there anything kind of more about that situation and kind of the initial attempt to offload the club that either of you can kind of shed any more light on?
you want me to take that, Paul?
I mean, you still have more sources, so yeah, you go first, and I'll.
Sure. Well, I guess on an official level from the FA, who made a sort of brief statement to some of the outlets on the 23rd of December, but we haven't heard anything officially from them since. And I have heard that repeated a few times, that the club had told them that they were trying to sell the club in late November. However, I've also heard from sort of 4 or 5 people behind the scenes involved at the governing body who privately are saying that they weren't aware of that at all. And I've spoken to at least 3 people who I would describe as being quite senior figures at the FA who learned of it when we did on that day just before Christmas. So that there's I guess differing versions of that. Unless we can hear from the outgoing owners of the football club, it's very hard to kind of get their side of that across fairly. But what I think is important to say is, from speaking to the soon-to-be owner, Lewis Taylor, yesterday, he was quite at pains to stress that the kind of existing shareholders had been extremely helpful in trying to save the club on Tuesday. He was quite keen to stress that it hadn't been a situation where there were kind of unpleasant, aggressive club killing people on one side and club savers on the other. He described it as a room where everybody was all coming together to try and help and solve the problem. So and he was quite at pains to make sure that he mentioned that. So he was very appreciative of the FSA did to make sure the sale go through in time, because it would have been quite easy, I think, for the club to have been liquidated yesterday. It was on the existing shareholders it was up to them really to halt that process. So and thankfully for all concerned, that has been halted.
I mean, following up on what you said about nobody, that does surprise me, because I can only speak for the club, but obviously I've said already that nobody, as far as I'm aware, like Jay or the players or anything like that, had any hint. Normally, like you say, and I can see in the chat, it's like, surely if you're looking for a buyer, something like that would leak. And obviously with the great work you and your women's football colleagues do, stuff like this doesn't stay secret for that long, because players talk, managers talk, you start to hear things. And the fact that we haven't heard any of this, and you're saying that people from the FA are saying they hadn't heard any of this, who one might expect to hear things from this, that's where I'm starting to think that sounds really strange. Your antennae starts to go up, and like you say, we'll probably never know what actually went on, and we're now in a position where the owners have made it happen. But it's a very strange situation, and it's, for me personally, to watch your club die and be resurrected in a week and a half is certainly one of the weirdest things I've ever been through in my sporting life.
Been one of the most remarkable stories in the kind of modern era of English women's football that I can remember. We've had some very tough times for certain clubs. You mentioned Notts County, Yeovil. I mean, all different situations, but we've had sad stories around Sunderland, Donny Bells, for all sorts of different reasons. But this one will live long, very, very long in the memory, in the sense of the kind of the harsh and dramatic nature of that pre-Christmas news, and then the kind of out the blue resurrection and last minute reprieve. But yeah, I guess we're all hoping, I suppose, as any human being would do, that for the people who rely on the club for their livelihood, that it's going to continue to be an upward trend from here. And the new owner I found to be a very impressive gentleman. And from all accounts, for the people who know much more about business than I do, is a very reliable person to have come in, and he loves the women's game. He's been backing Wolves women for a long time, and I think he wants to get the local community as involved as possible and more local businesses. But in general, he's here to invest and try and take the team forward. And everything he said so far has been the right things that you'd expect someone to say at this moment in time. Forgive me if I'm going on a bit long here, but I think there are other worries as well at the moment around what happens next, because as good as those intentions are, I think there are, as we've alluded to, a few players who will now be confused as to what happens next, because they were made redundant essentially, but will now find, I suspect, that they are still registered as Coventry United players. So having, as I understand it, in 4 cases at least, there are players who've been offered a contract by other clubs, including a couple from the WSL. But it's not quite yet clear whether those contract offers will be valid, in the sense that they would have been fine if they were free agents and they'd been made redundant. But now they're waiting for clarity on whether or not they are still registered, and therefore those clubs would have to buy them out of those contracts from to buy their registrations, essentially, i.e. a transfer. So the next few days will be quite interesting to see what's happening there. I know that although there isn't been much PFA support because they're not a WSL club, there are some individuals at the PFA who have been advising the captain, Katie Wilkinson, and we know that Kelly Simmons has been in contact with the captain as well on a fairly regular basis and trying to help. And I think that all these things will hopefully speed up now that the majority of people at the governing body and elsewhere are back at work, because an awful lot of people would have been on annual leave and in some cases off because of COVID over the Christmas period. So the hope is that things will start to become a bit clearer in the coming days, but it has been an anxious wait for those players. And one, for example, who I promise not to name, but was hoping to be signing for a club today, but that's obviously not possible right at this moment. But yeah, we will. I guess more will come out in the coming days.
Yeah. I think it's important, obviously, like you say, the clarity from the FA is a big one, like you say, now that the bank holiday's done, because I think, we've seen and heard, like you say, players, I can think of a couple just off the top of my head that are training with the WSL club that could potentially, like you say, have an offer. And then now it's like, well, technically they are still contracted to Coventry, which means that, I think, was it today they return to training, or is it tomorrow, that technically they should be required by the terms of the contract to turn up. I've also heard as well, again, not naming names, that certain players haven't turned up or aren't planning to turn up. Again, whether that's advice from elsewhere or personal choice, I don't know. Can't say at this minute in time. But I want to sort of rattle through a few of these questions. I'll start with you, Paul. I don't know if you're able to maybe give some sort of insight. Were there no offers? I think, has it been mentioned that there were no offers forthcoming, and that was why you were looking sort of for liquidation?
I mean, that's what the administrator said. As far as that goes, I know pretty much as you guys do, and probably less potentially than Tom does in terms of what happened behind the scenes financially. But again, as far as I know, this all happened very quickly, and you'd think that there would be some indication that there was a change of ownership, or someone would have said something, and nothing was said to me on or off the record about it. And I accept that I'm only a local radio reporter and can't expect to be told the ins and outs of such things. But when you're around people every single week and you build up things, they tend to mention things, and there was absolutely nothing. It was no, right, we're on for next week, and the owners are putting stuff in and the players are very happy, which is interesting when you talk about players planning not to turn up, because I always got the feeling that as a group they wanted to stay together, and they were gutted about broken up. And like you say, I wonder if the speed of this and the way they were treated by the sponsors has coloured that viewpoint, and now they've had a bad experience about it. But certainly everything I used to get and everything we saw on Twitter as well was, we're loving our football. There was one player on the team who joined this season, and it was said, Jay was telling me, it was said to her, what have you done with this player? Because she's a completely different player from where she was at her last club. She's enjoying her football again. She's really happy and outgoing and running through walls. And there were a few players like that. And I just hope that this affair hasn't soured them on Coventry, because, they were loved by the fans here in Coventry. Players like Rio Hardy, players like Liv Ferguson, the players who joined from Sheffield United, were becoming heroines in Coventry. We saw the crowdfunder that was started up by some children who played in the under-10s and who idolised these players. And, if they wanted to come back to Coventry, obviously they'd all be welcome back with open arms and they'd really have a chance to build something. But I just hope that the way they've been treated financially hasn't soured that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's another question here from Chris. I don't know if either of you want to sort of add your thoughts to it, and Gareth, you can sort of add yours as well. Any ideas on a Lewis model of share ownership? It's been sort of rumoured or mentioned. I mean, could that work? Would it be something anybody would like to see? I don't know if you want to go first, Tom, and then sort of pass around.
Well, the Lewis ownership model is absolutely fantastic, and so far it's proving to be a huge success. So I wouldn't be surprised if that was used. But as I understand it at the moment, that's not a kind of immediate plan. Lewis Taylor will be the sole owner. He will own the football club outright. And what he has said, though, and he has been quite clear on, is wanting to really, as the months go on, he wants the community and local businesses and all the fans and others to be more and more involved. So I guess I wouldn't rule it out, but I couldn't say for sure at the moment whether that precise model is going to be copied. But certainly, I know he wants to work with as many people as possible to help grow the club.
Gareth, do you want to follow on?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that I would add there is, fan ownership is something that, when it's done well and it's done properly, it's incredible. South America are really big on fan ownership. And, Boca Juniors, River Plate, it's two of the sort of biggest clubs, universally recognized, all owned by members. So, it is a strategy. And obviously Germany have the 50+1 rule as well. When it's implemented properly, it's not something that I think in the UK and in England we kind of look at it and associate it with more something to do with maybe the lower leagues, but it's absolutely a model that can go right to the very top of the game and achieve success, on an international level. So, it would be great if that's something that they're looking to implement. But I think the important thing at the moment is, the club is going to be around, and I think the sort of short-term focus is going to be kind of stabilization, and if a points deduction comes, then relegation is looking likely. They they're in that scrap already without a points deduction. So I think the short-term, the next 6 months are going to be pretty critical, but it's something that I think a lot of people would quite like to see, and could hopefully lead into some fantastic successes.
Yeah. Just sorry to jumping in again, but there is one more sort of penalty issue that I am worried about, which I imagine will be looked at in the coming days and weeks, and no one will want this to be the case, but I would imagine there's a possibility of a penalty for not fulfilling the fixture on Sunday against Bristol City. So that's another one to watch out for, which may theoretically impact on the club's attempt to stay in the Championship mathematically. So I guess from a sporting point of view, hopefully not, and hopefully that's definitely within the rules. That's another real possibility, because as it stands, that game is not going to be fulfilled, certainly on the fixture date that was scheduled.
I mean, could that not just be because I was wondering if necessary, that's a forfeit. And 3 points to Bristol City, a 3-0 win. But
which is very possible, yeah.
Would that not be the FA's? I think if there had to be a penalty, I think that would probably be Coventry's preferred viewpoint, because it was like, well, we knew we weren't going to play this, we'll take that loss, but we're not actually being penalised further than that potential 3 points. And also we've got all the things with administration and that possible points deduction happening as well. Of course, 10 points in the women's game as well is different. We've got to consider that there are only 10 games of the season left, so that's a third of the possible points on the table being taken away. So it seems effectively a death penalty for a club trying to set itself back on its feet. And, I do wonder if the FA might look at this, particularly with trying to build women's football. Obviously, I hope from a Coventry perspective that they'll look at it and go, hold on a minute, if we need to look at this as a case on its own merits in the women's game, rather than just apply the same thing that might apply to a league with 40 fixtures and the potential to pull 20-25 of those points back very, very quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. But I guess just to, I suppose, put a slightly different view in as well. I have spoken to some people who are quite optimistic that whatever the club have to face in the next fortnight, that they could still get out of trouble. It was a team, after all, who, after a difficult start, had appeared to really pick things up in December. I think 2 wins and a draw in the last four games in all competitions, unless I'm mistaken, which is an upturn in form compared to the winless runs they had previously. So if they were able to sort of resurrect that upward trajectory, then anything is possible. It doesn't have to be a death knell, but I understand what you mean, Paul, about the concern for that, given the current points total and how close it is with Watford. I entirely understand what you're saying.
I do agree with you about the team, though, because, like I said, leaving Watford, it was all, this team is coming together. And we've seen in interviews that they've had, we felt we were building something, and it was really starting to kind of come through. What does surprise me, and you've referred to it, Tom, are you surprised that there was no statement from the FA? And more to the point, we still haven't had any statement from the FA Women's Championship on what's happening either. The only confirmation of anything was Bristol City saying that this game was off. And obviously on Christmas Day, Katie Wilkinson tweeted that, they felt that they were being blatantly disregarded as players by the FA as an apparatus, not the PFA, but the FA as an apparatus and the FA Women's Championship.
Yeah, on the one hand, I am quite surprised, but at the same time, I'm also not surprised in that the timing of this was about as bad as it possibly could have been. In that, I know quite a significant number of the key personnel involved sort of would have started their annual leave either on the day or the day before this news broke, and would not have been expected to return until yesterday. Now, I know there have been some individuals who have worked on this sort of regardless on their time off. And I know, for example, and I think it was alluded to by Katie Wilkinson, but I know that Kelly Simmons has essentially not taken any of the holiday she should have been taking because she was trying to help with this instead. Could there have been a statement? Perhaps there could have been, but the way the FA works, there are various boards that have to meet together to sort of discuss these types of things. The WSL Women's Championship Board, for example, and that takes time, and it's not easy. Sort of last week, so I'm not trying to sort of make excuses for them, but the timing has not been good. But yes, we could have had a statement. I felt, particularly for fans, or I know Bristol City announced about the game on Sunday not being on, but I felt that would have perhaps been some clarity on that from the league officially would have been helpful. But no, and then I guess in the last 24, 48 hours, the clubs have all come back. We've got 40 COVID cases and are now contending with multiple requests to have games postponed. So there's a big in tray. Could more be done faster? I'm sure many people would say yes, but I can also understand how it's taking so long to. And I think, again, one more point on that is I think particularly once people at the FA heard that there was a possibility the club might be bought, I think that then pauses any of those, because they will have been planning for the club to be liquidated and what they were going to do about the liquidation, and then suddenly you've got to kind of go to a new plan. So I think that might also slightly explain why we're still waiting. But I would hope, and I would really hope, that there will be some more clarity from them tomorrow.
I think the most surprising thing that's kind of come out of all of this for me was that the PFA only supports the WSL, whereas kind of in the men's game it supports the Premier League and then the three EFL leagues as well. Is it simply just a case that because the league isn't fully professional, that's why then the PFA don't support it, or are there other reasons for kind of the lack of support from the union there?
Yeah, you raised such an important point, Gareth, because this is something that a lot of players and agents and others have said to us in the past, how they find that really quite exasperating, because this is the second highest league in the country. So wouldn't that be? I mean, there are some players in the league who are supported, people who have either played in the WSL in the past or have been full time in the past and have kept their membership. But in general, because the league is not a fully professional league, it's not one of the leagues that the PFA typically allow members for, which I personally would hope is a policy that will change as a matter of urgency, because there's a far greater need for a union for women's championship footballers than there is for men's championship footballers, who still deserve a union. Of course they do, but men's championship footballers' livelihoods are typically fairly stable by comparison to this. So I can't. They're not here, I suppose, to put across their case. But I on a personal level, I would hope that policy is changed, because it feels fitting that if you're playing in the Women's Championship, you'd need more union support. That said, as we did mention earlier, and what Katie Wilkinson and the captain had stressed on Twitter, there have been individuals who have reached out for support and legal advice and other matters, which I know has been appreciated. But it's more that policy that they can't all be members. Oh no, the other thing I should clarify as well. So as we understand, there are 5, I think, players in the squad who are still members from previous. From playing at previous clubs, so there hasn't been a complete lack of support. But it's just that and so, for example, if there was an issue at another women's championship club, it would be a similar issue where the vast majority of the players wouldn't be members.
Yeah,
I do.
Go on, Paul.
I do think it's that this thing. One of the things that I saw a lot of people say when they thought Coventry United was dying was. Fans say there was actually a group that set up, you guys may be aware of, the FA Women's Championship Fans Collective, which is basically fans of all club. It was a Sunderland fan called Rich who reports on them, along with a few others who basically set it up. And I've been involved in discussions with them. And a lot of the discussions in there is, if Coventry United do die, they can't die in vain. This has shown up that things need to change, like with the PFA, for example. With perhaps regulation in women's football in general. And I do think that if anything good, if you like, aside from Coventry United surviving comes out of this, I think it's raised an awareness in a lot of people who perhaps weren't aware before of the need of the work that still needs to be done in women's football to bring it up to that level.
And another, forgive me if I'm getting sort of too big a picture here, but this is an issue. In terms of financial support, this is an issue like across the whole of football, men's and women's, and it's women's football particularly. We see so many issues around the world where there is not sufficient support for leagues, particularly if you look at South America. There's a distinct lack of player welfare support from the governing bodies and the unions. And I know over in France there are concerns around the kind of sort of what's the word, sort of grievance procedures that players have at their disposal, and there are huge changes that are needed across the whole world. I think it's positive here in the UK, but a long way to go. And just more widely looking at the finances, as a price from PFA, football in general, men's and women's, is running at a loss. You don't need many fingers to count the number of men's clubs who are making a profit in England, and so women's football clubs, a majority, are also running at a loss. And even where the accounts might show breaking even or something similar for a WSL club, it's usually offset by a large chunk of money coming across from the male side of the club to finance it. So very little of it is self-sustaining, and it's the same in men's leagues that the clubs at the moment aren't self-sustaining. So that's a conversation that football more widely really needs to have sooner rather than later. It's long overdue, but the finances of football are extraordinary. You only have to follow somebody like Kieran Maguire, Price of Football, on Twitter to see the losses that clubs are making. It's absolutely extraordinary, and it can't continue for long.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul, I'll start with you on this, just sort of like an opinion, mainly as a fan, and then Gareth, you can sort of answer as well. But, we saw the other day, Holwell Sports Women had to fold, and it's something where you feel like it shouldn't be happening in this day and age. But what I wanted to ask you, Paul, was what do you think needs to maybe be done to prevent this from happening again? Obviously, we've seen the huge sort of backlash and a lot of talk from, like I mentioned before, everybody in the game. But we're talking about reviews into football finances, and I sort of worry that there's clubs like, for example, Durham and London City Lionesses with no men's team that are relying again on sponsors. But what would you like to see to maybe, like I say, just happen going forward in terms of maybe a review or any potential ideas for how it could be done in your view?
I mean, that's a very big question to ask. Someone who's essentially a fan who went to watch his local women's team and because of his job ended up commentating on them and being caught up in one of the maddest football stories of the past few years. But looking at what other people are saying and looking at what the FA Fans Collective are saying, I think women's football needs a specific review of itself, because I think the circumstances between women's football and the men's game in terms of the level of funds we're talking about and in terms of the potential sustainability, because like Tom says, all the WSL clubs, a lot of the WSL clubs are running at a loss because they're supported by Premier League teams. And I think the first thing that needs to be made is a review, so you don't have to be affiliated to a Premier League team to survive as a women's football team. I think there needs to be things like revenue sharing. The women's game needs to look at expanding certainly the top two divisions, because they're not big enough. There are gaps of several weeks without games, so you can't keep the momentum going like the men's game. Even in the WSL, I mean, all the postponements that we're seeing are going to cause issues as well. And I think that what needs to happen is the FA and people within football need to realise women's football is not just the same sport played by a different gender. It's its own sport in terms of the issues it faces in sustainability and we need to have more bespoke kind of approaches towards it. Maybe another review like the review that Tracy Crouch has committed to the men's game, and then basically a fan-led review and go from there and just see what the fans want, what the players want, what the people with knowledge of the sport want, and rather than it being dictated to based on the circumstances of the men's game, which is completely different circumstance-wise.
And it is completely different, because usually the clubs their business plan often, particularly at a level such as the Championship and even down in the Women's National League, the business plan for a year will probably be quite reliant on a sponsor. In this case, at Coventry United, that was okay. But Yeovil, the financial issues there were largely because a sponsorship they were expecting, quite a significant sponsorship they were expecting to happen, didn't come off. And when you've planned your budget for the season on the basis of that money coming in and then it doesn't emerge, then you get an issue. Whereas in the men's game, the TV money usually will be the largest source of income, and in the I can't imagine it would happen, but in the kind of extraordinarily unlikely event that Sky ever had financial issues, then there'd be quite a lot of clubs whose budgets would be in the men's game would be different. But that's obviously not going to happen. But it obviously did happen with ITV Digital around 20 years ago. For those who might remember, had some rights in the men's EFL, and ITV Digital essentially was no more, and that had a big financial impact. So, but anyway, I'm going off topic, but Paul's absolutely right. The women's game needs to be treated differently. I think it needs its own review, and I think it needs its own legislation almost to protect clubs. And I guess I don't know what Paul thinks about this, but I in an ideal world, I'd quite like to see clubs protected in some way as a sort of community asset, because the clubs are at the heart of the community, and it's not just a business. It's a big part of people's lives, and I'm hoping, I guess, in an ideal world scenario, that's the kind of change that might come out of a review.
I think the thing for me is it's this gets spoken about so often. Every single year, the FA Cup prize money tables are published, and the same conversation happens. But Coventry United men lost in the first qualifying round of the FA Cup. Prize money for losing the first qualifying round is £750. If you lose in the fifth round proper of the Women's FA Cup, you get £750. Now, of course, you've got the prize money from beforehand, but Coventry United men will have got kind of similar kind of money from losing. 750 quid they get paid for kind of losing in the first qualifying round, whereas if you're getting 750 quid if you lose in the fifth round proper, which is the final 8 teams in the country. So I think that would make such a massive difference to some of the smaller clubs as well, and being able to be more sustainable. And granted, a lot of it's going to come down to sponsors and the attractiveness and the money that's around the package, because Emirates are going to be paying an absolute fortune to sponsor the men's FA Cup. But we've seen how in the men's game a good cup run is integral to so many teams. And Sutton United had a great cup run a couple of seasons ago, and then last year were able to mount a really strong promotion challenge, and they've made it into the Football League and seem pretty secure in League Two this year. And I just feel like something similar could be possible in the women's game if that prize money was slightly different. But that's a conversation that we're having time and time again.
I think, Gareth, you've hit that perfectly. It's not just in the FA Cup. I think we're always being told about all this money coming into the women's game, but it only seems to be hitting the top tier. All the focus seems to be on the top tier because that's where the glamour is. And Tom, you and some of your colleagues do great work covering the championship as well. But
in fairness, we really don't. It's just not possible. But sorry, carry on. But yes, I don't feel I do a good job covering the championship because you just can't be at the WSL and the championship on the same Sunday. But yeah, sorry, carry on. That's very kind of you to say that, but I can't take that praise. I just can't.
See, I was trying to put you up there and be nice, because certainly your work on this story, I think, has been a major contribution in getting it out there and getting it to perhaps people who watch the WSL and perhaps follow you for that, but might not be aware of the championship. And I just think the championship is a great league, and it's almost as if women's football now is where men's football was in, say, the early 90s in terms of the money, because the TV money is starting to come in, but it's all going to the top league, and all the focus is going to the glamour of the top league, and we're getting the rich clubs getting richer. It sounds silly to say when they're all running at a loss, but you're seeing all the top clubs signing all the star players, and there were great players in the championship, but we're seeing second tier clubs. I mean, if a second tier men's club had happened like it had happened to Coventry United, you can imagine the level of press coverage and whatever else that would have happened.
Well, and there are, of course, financial troubles at Derby County in the men's. But yeah, as you say, the press coverage is on a completely different level. Again, going all sort of philosophical here, but one of my fears, I suppose, about the women's game is that we're not very far away from a WSL where every club in the WSL is affiliated to a men's Premier League side. Birmingham might well stay up this season. And Reading are clearly very well run, and I've got a fantastic manager in Kelly Chambers and are overperforming. But how many more years is that going to be possible for those clubs to withstand the rise of women's sides who have been brilliantly backed by their men's affiliate? Just some examples lower down the leagues, even when they were down in the 5th tier, Southampton were putting a tremendous resource, hugely impressive backing to the women's side, and their academy set up and their facilities there is very, very good. They're WSL bound. That I have absolutely no doubts about that. The Southampton are on the march towards the WSL. We know that there's interest from Wolves as well, that they want to get up there. That they'll put the money in slowly but surely. Leeds United also have ambition to over the long term start to get a really strong side. I know Burnley have talked about turning full time. So I guess what I'm wondering is, what will it be possible for clubs who aren't backed by those millions to keep up in the long run? And there are people who are quite concerned that which won't be possible because there is so much resource for a men's Premier League club that and putting in 3 or 4 million a year, they don't notice that in their budget. So whereas how could an independent women's side produce such money? It's going to be very, very difficult. Very difficult.
I mean, I want to ask like all of you, but this is particularly Manchester United based as well. The thing that perhaps worries me a bit is the FA will, in their kind of race for sustainability, will see these Premier League teams and go like they might have gone with Manchester United a couple of years ago with Tottenham, where it's right, we want the big clubs in the WSL, so we'll get, so you know, if you can throw money at it in the Championship and get up there, and like you say, will then lead to the point where Newcastle will perhaps take over Durham. There's already been worries about that happening, because obviously for the PR for their owners and whatever else, that would be a wonderful thing. And it's just the case now, is, do you guys think that the FA, in the quest to get like Premier League clubs in, clubs like Coventry United might suffer because they'll almost be bypassed, because the FA will see clubs like Leeds, Newcastle wanting to come in and go, okay, here you are, here's in the Championship. They have one season in the Championship where they throw money at it, and effectively no other club has a chance of getting promoted. And then we have the situation where even the part-time teams like Crystal Palace just can't keep up.
I'll just jump in. I think what we've seen in the last few years compared to when United and Spurs were in the Championship is a massive increase in quality in the league in general. At the start of this year, we were kind of talking about the Championship, and I was saying that, looking at the signings that Coventry have made, they could go and be sort of genuine title contenders. We spoke about Durham, Liverpool, Sheffield United are always there or thereabouts as well. So I think that's the main thing, is that now the Championship is a much more competitive league than it was, even in 2018. I think a lot more clubs already now have a women's team, and they're kind of in the pyramid. Southampton are making their way up it. Newcastle are in a promotion battle from their National League group with Liverpool Feds at the moment. They're about 8 points behind. Leeds are in that same division. So we're kind of seeing these other clubs gradually start to invest and put the money in. So I don't think it will necessarily be a case that the FA bypass it unless there's any sort of more curtailments of leagues. Then I think the promotion should be pretty organic and not kind of forced as it has been over the last couple of years. But yeah, I think what we will see is inevitably those clubs that do have the backing of a Premier League side will naturally just have more money to be able to invest. And then they'll be able to move through the pyramid quickly, and may overtake clubs like Coventry along the way just purely because of a finance thing.
And I think it's a difficult one because the FA and the whole of women's football would be unwise to say, no thanks, Man United, Chelsea, Man City, Arsenal, we don't want your money. Don't invest that in the women's game. So it's and I think the support that these clubs are putting in is fantastic. It's the challenge is to try and make it fair and sustainable for everybody, and to filter some of the money down the leagues. We know Barclays are going to sponsor the Championship next season, which is a really welcome development for the league, and I think that will help it strengthen. And we know that a kind of a portion of the TV rights from this year were already being filtered down. Some would say it could be more, but anyway, it's progress. I think that Gareth raised the most important point about the prize money, it's just the challenge is filtering more of that down the system more fairly, because the winners of the men's FA Cup don't really need the money that they get for winning that. In my opinion, I appreciate they would argue that they deserve it, but it's not the reason why they want to win the FA Cup, is it? It's not, and it's much more about the lower rounds. And just as an example, the winners of the Women's FA Cup got £25,000 for winning, which is less than £1 for every person who was in the stadium, which I find absolutely extraordinary. And it's going to be the same in this season, because they've not amended it for this season. And that's the one thing which we find all a bit baffling, because there is the commercial interest there, because the final was broadcast live in Australia, many countries around the world. It was live. Obviously, millions watched on the BBC, and 40,000 odd people were there, paying reasonable money. So I don't understand personally how 25,000 is the price, but it's not actually about the final, is it? It's about those early rounds. It's like you mentioned, £750 for some of the early rounds. That feels as though that's out of kilter with the growth of the league, and hopefully that's going to change. And sorry, I've gone all ranty on a few topics there, but that's one. I think that'd be an easy fix, wouldn't it, to filter more money down the divisions to more clubs?
I think just to touch on that from my personal point of view, Paul, I think for me, I've always been sort of somebody that said, clubs that are going up the leagues, going up on merit. And without getting into a big debate on, I feel that more should be going up, etc. I think, you look at, like you mentioned, obviously you mentioned Man United. I think another one was West Ham. They seem to jump divisions. And I think money talks. And in a way, it's obviously money going into the game is great, but money talking where it's a detriment to other teams with your likes of Coventry and, there's previous examples in other years. I think that's the bit for me where something needs to be done, because what we don't want is when this sponsorship deal comes into the Championship, is that to then send clubs into financial ruin, because you want to see more going pro. We're speaking to Mike, who's a Palace fan, yesterday, and he was saying Crystal Palace are training 4 times a week, which, to be fair, still as a semi-pro side, is quite a lot 4 times a week. So I think it's important for me that we don't sort of see this inequality between sort of tier 1 and tier 2, plus then the Championship and the National League, because at the end of the day, you don't want, even we can throw Wolves into the mix as well. We talked about Southampton before. You don't want Wolves, just because they've got a men's team, chucking loads of money at it, flying up the leagues, which is probably likely to happen anyway. And then, other clubs suffer. A good example at the minute is Ipswich. They seem to be going well. Obviously not Premier League. They've, big club for League One. But I think for me, it's very important to sort of, get that balance and keep everything sustainable where possible, without sort of taking away the money coming into the game, and sort of how it's shared about. Very quickly before we sort of rotate guests, Paul, I want you to sort of shout out a message if there's anybody sort of watching this, maybe local business wise, sort of for getting involved for Coventry, because I've seen something where Lewis was sort of talking about he wants local businesses to come on board. So have you got a message maybe that you want to sort of put out there? And what I will do as well is we'll tweet the fundraising link, which we'll mention in more detail at the end of tonight's show.
I think the one thing I could say about Coventry United and why business is to get involved is people always talk about, for want of a better word, real football. And this is, a group of people at all clubs across the divisions. It feels real and committed, and it's an elite. These are elite athletes playing at the same level as a lot of the men. They're training the same times. They're putting the same work in, and they deserve the local support and the chance to be the best they can be. And so I just say to anyone thinking of getting involved or even going to watch women's football, I'm assuming everyone watching does, because obviously it's a women's podcast, but the way I'd sell and always say to people is go and watch one game of women's football and it'll get under your skin straight away. And I think that's the message I'd say to businesses as well.
Yeah, spot on. I think, like you say, even like, I've obviously been down there myself this season. I've made 5 games, and that's, like you say, just purely as, a women's football fan when it's been possible. There's been a few of us traveled down from Manchester, and like you say, fantastic opportunity for businesses. It's a club where, having read a lot of comments from sort of fans and people involved and people down the Coventry area, there's a real community and family feel. And I know sort of the junior clubs and things like that, they idolise those players. And there was something the other day, Natalie Johnson posted, about her being an inspiration for young girls. And I think getting local businesses on board is, one, good opportunity for the business, and 2, it helps keep, like you say, sort of football in Coventry alive. And obviously, fingers crossed that in 12 months' time we're sat here and there's a much better sort of outlook and picture for Coventry. We're going to rotate the guests now. So I want to say thank you to the 3 of you, to Gareth, for Tom, and to Paul for coming on and giving up your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. And as I mentioned, what we will do, we've got Jonathan and Rich Laverty coming in now, is we will mention at the end and sort of shout out the sponsorship, because I believe that is closing in a couple of days' time. And yeah, we'll obviously get everything tweeted out as well. So yeah, thank you very much to the 3 of you for joining.
Cheers.
What a pleasure. Keep up the great work, guys. Nice to speak to you.
Cheers. Thank you.
See you later.
See you later. Good evening.
Cracking show, and just first of all, just thanks Matt and Gareth for putting together such a great show so far. It's great to see Tom and Paul on the show as well, so for the first time, so brilliant. How are you doing, Rich? You okay?
Yeah, it's like magic, isn't it? I was just watching this show 30 seconds ago. Sat here with my bro, just listening, and now I'm here. Yeah, I'm all good, mate. Thanks.
Yeah, just to before anybody thinks about disappearing as well, or thinks that we're finished, we have got this until sort of 9 o'clock, haven't we, John? Just to put viewers in the picture. So obviously we're going to expand a little bit more and come at it from sort of a different content. So there you go, Catherine. That should hopefully answer. Yes, it is a double show. Such is the big news and sort of the excitement and the interest, shall we say. You know, I've had a lot of people asking, are we doing something on this? So we decided to throw it out on a Wednesday. But yeah, we are indeed carrying on. So I'm going to hand over to you, John, to kick off, and I'll shut up for a little bit.
No, it's great, and it's just I know a lot of people have probably stayed in the comments, but I just like to kind of go back to the beginning as well, just in case anyone's just joined us late or missed your introduction at the very start there. And Rick, you can just jump in and kind of give your thoughts on how this has all kind of unfolded over the last 2 weeks. But it was just literally just a couple of days before Christmas where we heard this surprising news, and it was a surprise. You know, me and Matt's been to a few games at Coventry United this season, and you know, even though he was playing not great on the pitch, there was no signs of, you know, behind the scenes it being so bad. And literally within the space of 2 weeks, you know, a lot's happened. Obviously, good news now. But just, Rich, what are your thought processes as a journalist reporting on this and hearing all this information to go from one extreme to the other again in the space of 2 weeks? Your mind must be blown.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of taken a little bit of a backseat role with it. I generally do with the Championship just because I'm a little bit compromised, really, and what I find out. I suppose I probably find things out that I wouldn't as a journalist because I work for a club, and obviously, you know, we're asking a lot of the same questions a lot of people are, to be honest, about what's going on. But I'm sure we'll come on to that. But yeah, I mean, look, it's good news that I think the owner or the prospective new owner yesterday said it was stage one, which it is. And Tom obviously alluded to some of the potential issues that might come of this now. But stage one was to save the club, which has happened, which is the main thing. So yeah, it's been crazy because, you know, I think we all saw the story and heard the rumours over the weekend. I actually heard it. I went into training and people were talking about, that was actually the first I heard of it, was at Sheffield United, that potentially someone wanted to buy them. So I think everybody had kind of heard the same thing. And then Tom obviously wrote the story, and I think it was always going to happen. I know they only had 24 hours, but I think if someone wants to buy and someone wants to sell, you know, it's a pretty easy thing to do. So it's good that it's been saved. But yeah, I think there's a lot of questions now to arise from that. Again, many of which Tom and Paul and the guys on the previous show alluded to. And I think the whole league, Coventry more than anyone, and their players and their staff, but, you know, every other team in the league and agents and coaches, and, you know, with the transfer window being open, there's a lot of questions that need answering pretty quickly, because this is not happening pre-season. You know, we are smack bang in the middle of the season. I know it's easy to forget. We haven't had games, obviously, for a few weeks with the winter break, but obviously everyone's back this weekend, bar obviously the postponement so far, you know, and we've got 3 weekends in a row of league football. So, you know, this is happening live, and, you know, probably everybody needs answers sort of as soon as possible.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, sorry, John, just to jump in, I think like we say, I think for me, and I touched on this before, the answers as soon as possible are the main thing. You know, I know obviously we talked earlier about the Bristol postponement. You know, there's sort of Women's FA Cup coming up soon, and there's going to be questions on that. And, you know, are Coventry going to be able to sort of carry that on? You would think so now, assuming that all the players that are contracted stay. Like I mentioned earlier, you know, we've sort of told, or I'd heard that there was possibility that a few weren't going to be, you know, turning up for training, or they wanted to go elsewhere, or they'd agreed deals, and, you know, that's where it gets tricky for me. But I think clarity is the main thing. You know, coming out now, we've obviously heard from the prospective new owner from Coventry, but somebody from the FA coming out and saying, look, this is the deal, or looking into it, we'll release a bigger statement or some more communication, you know, in a week or two, or however long it takes. And I think for me, if we can, you know, go from there, that would be a big start. And obviously, like we alluded to earlier, you know, now the bank holidays finished and the takeovers, you know, verbally agreed, I think this is the next step now for me.
Yeah, if I could just come in, Natalie, I know you're in the comments just asking for Reece. Reece could have come on this show, but obviously he just messaged, obviously saying it's a bit awkward for him, obviously at this moment in time. But I'm sure he'll be back on again soon, and that's exactly what he said. He will be back on again soon, and maybe when things have calmed down. But a shout out to Reece as well. But we talked about players there, and obviously Reece and the players. Which just what are your thoughts on maybe like what the players have gone through in the sense of they don't even know what club they've been playing for in the last week, and their mindset has gone from one extreme to the other. No doubt players have had teams after them. I know that there's been interesting players of all different like age groups or experience, and all of a sudden they're staying at Coventry. I'm sure some are happy. I'm sure some are just baffled in what's happened. I know you've got to be careful in what you say, Rich, but what are some of these players going to be thinking right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a huge roller coaster of emotions, I'm sure, and that's probably where you rely on your likes of Wilco, obviously their captain and someone I worked with for 2 years, and she is a real leader, and I'm sure she's helped a lot of those players. It's quite a young squad in places, but yeah, I mean, like you say, 22nd of December, they were playing for Coventry as normal. 23rd, they'd lost their jobs, didn't have a club. Probably then, like you say, a lot of them start negotiating with other clubs, training with other clubs, which for many of them, I think it probably shows, they're probably not where they should be in the league, given how many clubs have been looking at the players. Obviously, like I think was said on the last show, even a couple of WSL clubs. And then, you go through all that, you probably start to settle on the news that, okay, it's not going to be Coventry, I'm going somewhere else, whether that's in the Women's Super League, the Championship, and then suddenly I'm going back to Coventry. Or am I? And they're the questions that are still open because actually there hasn't been that clarity yet on contracts. Whether they are still contracted to Coventry, whether they are still free to negotiate. I'm sure many will go back because, they were on good money, full-time football. So I'm sure for many of them it works to go back. But, for those that maybe had better offers, they're probably now waiting for some clarity on what can they do. Are they contracted? Are they not? Can they negotiate elsewhere? It's messy. And again, I think that's the biggest thing that we need clarity on. And that's all clubs, because I think every club in the Championship was probably looking at Coventry players, and they're probably now waiting to find out, what's happening as well. Do they need to move on to other targets? It's a short transfer window, January. We've already had a week of it. So, yeah, I mean, I can only imagine what they've gone through, the sort of highs and lows and coming and going and not really knowing what's going on. And like you say, probably a few of them still don't. I mean, what is it? It's Wednesday night now. So I think Tom said hopefully we'll hear something maybe tomorrow. I think the FA potentially were having some kind of call about the situation today. To what extent, I don't know. But I think we need to hear something before the end of the week when the games start up again. We need a real clarity on a lot of situations for Coventry's sake and their players' sake more than anything, around contracts, around are their games restarting, around things like points deductions and their game against Bristol, all the things Tom was talking about that everyone's asking, what's happening with this, what's happening with that? And the reality is at the minute, nobody knows. I don't even think Coventry knows. So it's there's a lot to do. And like Tom did say, to be fair to the FA, it has shifted again in the last few days. They were probably basing their work and their statements and what was going to happen with relegation and fixtures being expunged because it looked so likely that they were going to liquidate. Now, obviously, it's completely flipped, and the conversations again have now changed to what happens with player contracts and things like that, because the club is thankfully going to continue.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, John, obviously we talked about with sort of Paul and Tom and Gareth earlier about the contracts, but I think the issue is, obviously we talked about have players agreed deals elsewhere and obviously the lack of clarity, but I think the big thing for me is, do the players know where they stand? Because with no PFA advice, obviously Katie Wilkinson did say, she'd been in touch with the PFA and sort of passed on advice to the best of her ability. And obviously Tom was saying there are players there that are still members, having previously played WSL. But, for those that maybe don't have agents and don't have that access, who's advising them? What did he do? It obviously, like I said, we're hearing that some may not turn up to training. Where are they going to stand legally? Because at the end of the day, if you've signed a contract and you're getting paid to play professionally, we've still got a club. The club hasn't been liquidated. So I would assume in my mind that those contracts are still valid. So therefore, you would be expected to turn up for work like the three of us would do here. If we were, obviously going to work, you paid, aren't you, by the terms of your contract. So it's one way it's a difficult situation, and I can only imagine, like I say, obviously with information being passed on as best it can through obviously club captain Katie Wilkinson, that we do see something. But obviously looking forward, the Bristol game got postponed. What happens next, I think, is the next big question. Which players are there, which players are trying to now engineer moves. What happens in terms of next weekend? Do they have a game? Don't they have a game? It's I think it's one of them where once we get an answer for something, it should start to follow. But I do think it becomes sort of a matter of urgency from my point of view, where it's just answers, isn't it, for everyone? I think as soon as we can get a clearer picture and somebody comes out and says, right, this is happening, that's happening, I think the better for me.
Just before Richard comes in on that one as well, for me, it's not just a case of the players would have been under contract up until, say, yesterday when the liquidation was supposed to happen, or today, whenever it was supposed to be, and then if they had signed for a new club, that would have started like the following day. Would it just be that you would have signed a new contract when you're still under a contract, if you know what I mean? So, for me, Rich, have I got that one right, or could you potentially start a new contract before ending a new contract, an old contract?
I wish I'd listened more in the law part of my media degree now, to be honest with you. But, fortunately, fingers crossed, it's not something I've had to worry about at Sheffield United, thank God, and I hope it never happens. But I don't know, truthfully. I mean, I've heard from speaking to agents and people involved, there's various stories going around about the contracts were obviously only going to be terminated on the date of liquidation. Obviously, the liquidation never went through. So does that mean the contracts stand? You've got other people saying players were told they were being made redundant with immediate effect on December the 23rd, which is obviously when the story came out. So does that mean, I think in any job, in any way of life, if you're offered redundancy or made redundant, you can negotiate with potential new employers as soon as possible, as far as I'm aware. Whether that then changes if that liquidation event doesn't happen, who knows? I mean, like Tom said, this has never happened. We've never had this in the WSL or the Championship. If a team has folded, they have folded, and it's been at the start of a season. So, we're right smack bang in the middle of a season here, and the team hasn't liquidated. They've come back. So no one really knows. I don't think anybody really knows. And the fact that you've got this situation now where some players haven't gone back in because they don't know what's going on, I think that shows how unclear it is, because this has been going on for 2 weeks now, and clearly there's still players that don't know what their contractual situation is. So again, it's just the clarity. That's the main thing that they need to know. They need to know, are they Coventry United players? Can they go and sign for someone else? Does maybe Coventry have to renegotiate with all their players? Even the ones that want to stay and will stay, do they have to go through that renegotiation process, which I'm sure for many will be quite simple? But for others that maybe have WSL offers or offers up the Championship, it may not be so simple. And they need to know they've got games. Okay, they might not play this weekend, but they play next weekend against us, ironically, which is another matter that we've not really heard anything on, but we're not the most important thing. But we are in the middle of a busy month. There are games coming up, and, Coventry need to know, can they fulfill those fixtures? Do they have a squad? And if they do have a squad, what does their squad look like? If they go into administration, do they get a transfer embargo? Things like that. It's all things we don't know yet, but and we need to hear something by the end of the week for the whole league's sake, but more for Coventry's sake than anything.
Yeah, I think, sorry, John, just another small bit there, obviously, as well. Rich talked about fulfilling fixtures. Let's assume, for argument's sake, that, there were players that were not going back, or they were, there's some sort of legal thing where those contracts were cancelled. It's going to have to be clear, because they're going to need to know numbers in terms of, possible recruitment. Because let's say, for example, that 6 didn't turn up and said they wanted out and moved to other clubs, are you then going to be short? So I think, sort of like I say, just to add to what has been mentioned there, like I said earlier, clarity is the big one. And I think, the coaches and the staff, both on and off the pitch, are gonna need that, because they need to know what they're working with and where everybody stands. And I think in their mind, the staff will obviously, off the field, will all be going back. It's those on the field, there might be some doubts. And obviously, again, obviously based on how they were treated by the old owner, would they want? I mean, listen, they might want to sit down with the new owner and discuss plans and where did he go, and want assurances: is this going to happen again? Am I going to be in this situation in 6 months, 12 months time? So I think there's conversations to be had, isn't there? And it's that key word, isn't it? That clarity word. But if I was a player and I was happy to go back, I'd be wanting, like I said, to sort of sit down before anything really, before you sort of took the next step. Because if not, then there's questions to be asked of, right, well, what's my next move then?
It's a cracking point, because obviously everyone's going to be happy that Coventry are now survived, but are the players actually happy with the way that they've been treated? Is this just a way for them to kind of look elsewhere now as well?
I mean, that's no fault of obviously staff, like, for example, the manager and the coaches. That's a fault of the old owners / sponsors, and obviously, it's I'm sure it's nothing against the club personally, like I say, the other employees, but it will be against those owners that have let them down massively, absolutely massively, and it turned into a shambles. Obviously, now we're sitting here, and luckily, we can sort of chat shortly or later, about it being saved. But it's an insane situation.
We spoke a bit about the players and obviously the staff just as well. How about like some of like the rival teams then, like and the relegation teams? So obviously transfer window, and because of this clarity isn't there yet. What must be going through, like say Watford's heads, or teams who have dropped points or gained points against Coventry, all this kind of stuff. Which what are your thoughts? Obviously, being close to Sheffield as you are. What are your thoughts on like the fact that we still don't know what's going on in regards to maybe any kind of points deductions there as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one. I don't want to sound like I'm being selfish or anything, because by no means are Sheffield United or anyone the most important part of this. We're just a after effect, really, but obviously just by mere coincidence, we happen to be their next game now, which is 11 days away. And I had a conversation with our club today saying, look, have we heard anything? Whether that's from the FA, whether it's from Coventry, we haven't. I had a brief conversation with someone at the FA today, essentially just asking, look, do we have a game next weekend? Because again, it's by no means the most important thing, but we've got tickets to sell. We've got match day programs to sort out. We have the things on the day to sort, the match day stewarding, etc. And it's 11 days away, and we don't know yet. Do we have a game? And we didn't really get any clarity today on that. So again, that's not the most important thing, but it's an element of, as I said before, this is happening mid-season. There's no getting away from that. And whether next week happens or not, there'll be another game the week after. I'm not sure who they're playing. And then I think they've got the FA Cup the week after that. So, yeah, I mean, it's a tough one, because it comes back to the whole thing about administration and whatnot. You don't want to kick a team when they're down. No one wants to see a team enter administration. Nobody wants to see relegation decided by a points deduction. But, as well as Coventry, Watford are going to be looking very closely at this. Obviously, they're joint bottom. And like you said, with the transfer window open, teams want to know what they're doing. If suddenly they think, okay, well, we might be safe from relegation, you might take it a little bit easier in the transfer window. If the points deduction doesn't happen and you think, okay, we're right in this battle again, you might try and recruit a little bit heavier. So it's all these little knock-on effects for the other teams that comes from the lack of sort of answers so far. Yeah, I mean, it's not great. I think Tom alluded to it with the administration issue. There's only one real precedent, and that was Yeovil, which I think a lot of people thought they were kind of unfairly treated, because, as he rightly said, they didn't enter administration, but they got a 10-point deduction anyway. And if they decide not to give a deduction, you might have teams like Watford on the phone saying, hang on a minute, this is what happened 3 years ago. And I think there'll probably be a few people at Yeovil with an interested eye as well, because I think they certainly felt they were hard done by, and I think a lot of people did. So rules are rules. Again, I don't know whether the difference between liquidation and administration in terms of the rulings, and I'll leave that to the FA. Like I said, no one wants to see it decided that way. And 10 points is 10 points. You can make it up. There's a lot of games still to play. So, but that's another thing that needs sorting very, very soon. Yeah, it's just not a good situation. I think I said when we were on 2 weeks ago, there's a lot of questions, and not many answers, and there's still a lot of questions and not many answers. So yeah, I think for the other teams it's not great, but look, we're not the most important thing. I'm sat here. If we have a game, we have a game. I hope we do have a game, because we've had our last one called off before Christmas. COVID's rife again. We want as many games as possible, so we don't want something called off for something that's not COVID, because we're going to end up with a huge backlog. So hopefully the game can be played, because it'll be a good game. They've got good players, and I'm sure there'll be a bit of attention around it if it's their first game back. So yeah, hopefully we get some idea before the end of the week whether we're actually playing that match or not.
It's interesting, John, obviously, because we had the conversation on the last show with obviously myself, Rich, Reese, and Natalie, sort of on other clubs and potential implications and potential, points being deducted and things like that. But I think what is clearer now is, because obviously Coventry is still going, that other clubs will now not lose those points. There was sort of talks that, if Coventry are liquidated, does everybody that's, had points and things like that, do they lose them? So I think that's a little bit clearer now that, those clubs will likely keep those points. But I think it was interesting what Paul was saying earlier about, like, could it be its own unique case? And I think, potentially it could be. Obviously, they've not been liquidated, but, like we've talked about, rules are rules, and admin, with the 10-point deduction, you would assume that that's going to happen. But I think, sort of like Rich said, questions will be asked if it doesn't happen. That's not saying we want to see it happen, but then I think it's such a unique situation. It's one of those, and it's one where the FA sort of need to decide, did those previous owners, why did they pull the money? Was it done on purpose? Because like Paul said, he believes that company is going pretty strong. So if that's the case, there's obviously a reason for not putting in the money or withdrawing it. Only those people will know, but I think, sort of going forward, did the FA look at it in that respect and say, well, no, you were the owners, you were promising you were going to put in this, we're sorry, there's your 10 points, or do they look at it from a different point of view and sort of that it is a unique situation? And again, it's just more, I think whatever they do, there's sort of, there's no winners and losers in it. I think whatever happens, nobody's going to come out of it satisfied, whether that's Coventry themselves, whether that's other clubs, whether that's clubs that have had financial issues in previous years. I think there's never any easy way around something like this. But I think from my point of view, I'm just happy that we've still got another football club, and Coventry were managed to be saved. That's the best news to come out of this whole talking point of the last 2 weeks for me.
So for me, now that like we know that they are saved, and how do we kind of go forward to make sure that things like this don't happen often? We've seen another team drop out in Tier 4, this week. Potentially others might happen throughout the rest of the season. Just stick with you, Matt. What are your thoughts on making sure things like this don't become a regular thing now, especially with COVID going on as well, and money's tight at all, everywhere, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to the debate we had earlier when sort of, Gareth mentioned about FA Cup and prize money and things, and we talked about sort of funding from the men's team. Do you know what? There's no straight answers, is there? Obviously, sponsorship's one thing, but my worry, like I mentioned before, was the fact that other clubs with similar models without a big men's team, I mentioned Durham and London City Lionesses that are requiring sponsors, but I think where the situation is for me, and I don't know how much say, if any, the FA can have in this. For me, if I was to say, I'm putting 200 grand in a club, I should be held responsible if that doesn't happen. And like I say, it's difficult because I don't know enough about this, and maybe Rich will be able to follow on. But as an owner, I believe that, if you're saying you're going to do something, you should be legally bound to do it. Now, obviously, I get that becomes tricky because in essence, that's the FA telling somebody what to do with their money, which obviously they can't do, and they can't interfere with sort of businesses. But it's how do you find a way around that, and how do you keep that there? Like I say, because at the end of the day, it's livelihoods that were close to being lost because funding's been withdrawn, and it's all this, like I say, sustainability. I don't know the best way about it, but if, like I say, if there was some cast iron guarantees or some, like we talked about before, regulation where it's all done and there's sanctions for the business owners if they do withdraw money, and they're hit with penalties or whatever, and something's in writing. I don't know, like I say, how viable this is legally, but that'll be something I'd sort of like to see, because, I touched on before, obviously losing Holwell Sports, and they're obviously a few, down a couple of tiers. But at the end of the day, it's another club gone, and we've seen it in the past. And what we don't want is for, like I mentioned earlier, for it to become unsustainable, where people are trying to I'm going to use the term run before they can walk, and that's not aimed at anyone specific, but, everybody's reaching full-time football or wants to reach full-time football. Everybody wants to reach the WSL. And I think if they go at it, sort of a process, and I think we talked about this on the last show, I think somebody mentioned Blackburn, and, go at it, a process and build your club and then aim to get there and go up and up rather than just chuck a load of money and then kind of do that. But again, it's very difficult to sort of give you specifics, John, without knowing sort of legal ins and outs, so to speak.
Do you want to come in on that one, Rich?
Yeah, I think there's sort of three elements to that, really, two which tie together. And again, I think this was alluded to a little bit on the first hour, and someone else said it during the week in an article, I can't remember who it was, about whether it actually was a lack of money or was it they weren't quite happy with how things were going. I can't remember who it was, from Coventry or from somewhere, who said that maybe expectations weren't matching reality. And obviously, I think it was alluded to on the previous show, that maybe they weren't happy with results. They were maybe surprised by how it was going. I think a lot of people were, to be fair. I think you look at the players in there, and I think people did expect them to be doing better than they are. But it does take time, just because, London City are up there or a Charlton are up there, it doesn't mean every team's going to be up there. Everybody builds at different speeds, and Coventry have obviously struggled. But, maybe, and that's where the other element comes in of we say, and we should, I think there needs to be a tighter vetting process on potential owners at any club, men's football, women's football, at whatever level. You need to know as much as possible about, are the people taking over the club able to sustain it? But maybe they were able to sustain it and decided they didn't want to. I don't know. Some people will know, but that's a theory. And then the sort of third element of that is, again, what Matt was saying. There's this worry about clubs spending beyond their means and running before they can walk. And, I spoke to someone the other day who said, they wouldn't be surprised if this situation does happen again. Not because the money isn't there necessarily, but because clubs are, I think, a little bit like in the men's game. I think you've seen in the Championship, in the men's game, like the wage bills and the money being spent for a second division is incredible. And I think I said this the other week, that clubs are now getting a little bit of a whiff of what the WSL offers now, the sort of the Sky money, the Barclays money, and they think, okay, let's spend a bit more than what we got, and then we'll make it back up when we get there through the sponsorship money, through the TV money, through, bigger attendances. But if you don't get there, you're going to be in trouble. And there are, the Championship's so strong and it's so competitive, but there are still independent clubs. There are still clubs that are being propped up by sponsorship, which Matt said, and that only goes so far. If you don't get to where you want to be and a sponsor runs out of money, you've nothing to fall back on. The good thing about Sheffield United is, if we ever went down that route and it went wrong, we have a club to fall back on, a big club that's in the Championship and obviously has been in the Premier League for the last few seasons. So, we're doing that other route of doing it slowly and trying to put the infrastructure in place off the pitch. And there's no real right or wrong way, because everyone's going on this sort of journey for the first time. And I think I said this in the summer, that we probably won't know what the right way is for another 4 or 5 years. But yeah, it might be a wake-up call for some. I hope it is, and I hope it isn't, because you don't want to put clubs off going after sponsorship. You don't want to put clubs off going full-time and offering that to their players and to their staff, because that's ultimately where we want to get to. We want to have 2, even 3 full-time leagues in the future, but it needs to be a wake-up call that the process, I think, needs to be a bit more strenuous, and we need to know what we're dealing with a bit more, because reality and history says this will happen again. Women's football is still growing. It's still very financially unstable. We all get excited about Sky Sports and Chelsea breaking transfer fees and, big wages and things like that. And that's great, but that's 3 or 4 teams out of hundreds. And, we don't really pay much attention, like Matt said, to Hallwell and Bolton and all the other teams, below the second and third division that we've lost over the years. And it's because the finances aren't there. And once the Championship clubs start spending, the teams below start thinking we've got to do that. Your Derbies and your Wolves and your Ipswichers, and And then the teams in the fourth tier think, well, we've got to start doing that because, it's like it's like a waterfall effect all the way down the pyramid. And yeah, there needs to change because we want clubs to spend money, but it has to be done in a sustainable way. And that's the conversation we've had all season about, is this sustainable? And obviously for Coventry, unfortunately, it very nearly wasn't. And they've been given another lifeline. But, is it temporary? Is it permanent? If they do get the 10 points, if they do get relegated, what happens then? And I mean, that's all ifs and buts. But, all the independent clubs and the clubs backed by, lower non-league sides, how long does it last? And the other question I sort of have, going off on a tangent, and this is something I've thought about for a while working for a championship club, is I love winning. I love going with the team and I love winning football games. Like when you work as part of a team, there's no better feeling. But I love winning just because I love winning. Like I've liked that all my life, whatever, whether it's a FIFA game or, playing down the park with my mates. But with Sheffield United, sometimes I look at it and think, where's it going to go though? And I definitely think that with Coventry and I look at Leicester, and I said this the other week, they went up with everything in place. They were already full-time. They had the training ground. They've got ahead of women's football. They had some good players. They recruited some good players. And they didn't get a point until the week before Christmas. And you think, that gap is huge. And you think, if they're struggling, what are we all doing it for, in a way? We're all throwing money at it to get to the WSL, and then what? Just survive, and it's sad in a way because the gap is so big. When you see a team like Leicester do that, you really do sort of look at it and go, wow, are we sometimes better off maybe in the Championship? But I think that's part of it now. Clubs are spending so much money, and I think it was said again on the previous show, there needs to be more promotion and opening up the leagues because this is a different topic, but when a team goes up, they're the only team. They're going into a league where everybody else in that league has at least a year experience in that league. If 3 or 4 go up, at least you can take points off each other. If suddenly they change the rules hypothetically and said, okay, we're going to send 3 teams up this season. You've got maybe Liverpool. I can't remember who the rest of the top 3 is. I think it's Liverpool, Durham, London City. They'd all struggle, but at least you look at it and go, well, Liverpool will play Durham. Durham will play London City. London City will play Liverpool. And at least they can get some points that way. At the minute, teams are going up and they're not getting points off anybody because they're just going up against teams that are stronger than them. So I think the whole thing needs looking at. I hope it's a wake-up call for a lot of people to look at the structure, to look at the leagues, to look at the finances, to look at the system, because something needs to change. Like, we're all getting excited, and rightly so, because the game is growing, but we need to be careful still. We can't have this keep happening. We can't have teams going full-time and then 6 months later nearly going into liquidation. Like, that's not sport. So yeah, I think there's I don't want it to put people off. It's a double-edged sword. You never want to put clubs off going full-time, and you don't want to put sponsors off getting involved in the game, but it has to be sustainable. That's the biggest word, and there's still a fear, I think, that it isn't. There's a lot going in, but there's still not much coming back out. And for Chelsea and for Man City, that's fine. They can make losses. Doesn't matter. It's what we said with the FA Cup prize money before. They don't need that money. It's the clubs down the ladder that need it, and it's a little bit skewed in that respect. But yeah, it needs to. I hope there's some sensible business people running a lot of these clubs and getting involved and offering advice, because it needs it. Because I think we are still running before we can walk in some respects. I know I've gone off on a tangent there, but I think it all links together in terms of how the sport moves forward. And yeah, maybe this needs to be a wake-up call in terms of how the game is structured.
Just wanted to jump in there, John. I don't know if you know anything or can maybe shed a bit of light on this, Rich, about obviously, Paul mentioned, say, about Coventry being co-owned. Obviously, the company that I'm assuming has pulled out had the majority of shares, but where did it sort of stand in that then? Like I say, with it being co-owned, what happens to sort of the other party or the other part of that ownership?
It's a good question, actually. Not something I massively thought about with everything else going on. They haven't said anything or said they're pulling out. I'd assume they will stay involved. I don't know whether the new owner is buying the whole club, or I assume he's just buying that share and financially just propping up that share of it. I'll be honest, I'm not 100% certain. I think obviously a lot of the money came from this 49%. You know, that was what allowed them to go full time. So I assume that's where a lot of the financial side of it is. I don't know what the other 51% is or what that other 51% does. But yeah, it's interesting. Again, I'm sure there'll be conversations in the background now between the new owner and the other stakeholders about what's happening and moving forward with the finances. But yeah, that'll be down to them. But I'm not 100% certain, to be honest.
Yeah. John, another question again from Paul. Obviously, we're talking and we mentioned earlier about losing sponsors. And like I mentioned, you know, it's not, like Paul's saying, it's not the fault of the club for losing sponsors that they relied on. But what I mean, where do we go? Because obviously rules are there, obviously for the integrity of the game and to protect it. And you know, like we've all alluded to, and I'm sure we all agree on, you know, it's nobody's fault other than the owners. You know, it's not the players' fault, it's not the staff's fault, it's not the fans' fault, or other people involved in the game. But where do we go? Because there comes a point, like I said earlier, you know, not everybody's going to be happy, but in essence, I'm saying sort of what do we do? What's the way around it? I don't think there's an easy way, is there? But it's one of them again. Like I said before, I felt there should be sanctions on the previous owners, but then is that legally possible? Potentially not, because it's their money.
It is tough, and you can't blame clubs, but you have to look at why sponsors have pulled out. Then, if sponsors have pulled out because I was like probably something that they couldn't get delivered, then obviously they haven't stuck to their end of the bargain as well. I think one thing that we've learned from this, and one thing that we can take away, is the fact that the players and the staff and they need to be looked after in the right way. You know, sponsors will pull out in some cases, or clubs will be poorly managed or mismanaged in certain ways. But we just have to look after the people who have got jobs. Richard, when you was talking earlier, I just want to come back to something, and he was kind of alluding like to something that Paul actually in the comments who was on earlier. He mentioned that clubs will get the strong will get stronger and the weak will get weaker. The way he was talking then, Rich, is kind of like he was kind of leaning a little bit towards that, with like the more in the sense of some of the clubs that are attached to the men's team, they would be able to invest that money. So as Championship gets stronger, or as Tier 3 gets stronger, they're kind of forced to spend that money. Is that kind of like the way you kind of see that the top teams will end up being just like the richest clubs?
I think so, but I think that's natural in any sport, men's football, women's football, you know, any sport in the world. You know, the best clubs, the best Formula One teams, whatever, you know, they're the ones with the most money because they get the best of everything. So I don't think that's necessarily the issue. I think someone else in the comments said it's that sort of arms race now where everybody, like I said before, everyone's trying to catch up. So it's a very difficult one because I don't really know how you stop that. You know, they've got the wage cap, but it's a very loose wage cap, and clubs find very easy ways around it by just pumping money into it from the men's side. So, and I don't think you can really make that any stricter, because you know we want our teams to be able to compete in Europe as well. So it's a double-edged sword. You start putting wage caps on, you're not going to see the players like Sam Kerr and Pernille Harder, etc., come into this league. That's the reality. So, yeah, the rich probably will get richer, and then the poor get poorer. But I think a lot of the time it's the rich get richer and the poor get richer as well. They just don't get as rich as the rich teams, you know. So, you know, you look at probably us at Sheffield United as a good example. You know, we've dropped away a little bit, but you know, we've had the same sort of over 3-4 years. We've been consistent with that, and we work with what we have, and we work within our means, and that's allowed us to run sustainably. Will it allow us to get promoted at the minute? Maybe not. Who knows? You know, we had a good start to the season. It's a close league. It's a very unpredictable league, which has made it very exciting. But yeah, it's tough because you look at, you know, Liverpool's budget, and suddenly then Coventry and Charlton and, you know, London City, what they're doing. It's hard, you know. But you look at it and go, well, again, it's a little bit the tortoise and the hare. You know, is it going to work for them, or will they have all disappeared in 5 years? And you hope they don't. But maybe the teams at the bottom, you look at Sheffield United, Sunderland, Blackburn, Watford, maybe they're doing it a bit slower. Maybe they will gradually rise back up. Who knows? Nobody knows. Like I say, we probably won't know for 4 or 5 years. But I think I just wanted to touch on what Paul actually said in the comments as well about, can you hammer a club for being, for losing sponsors? And it's a tough one. And like, that's probably the hardest thing about sport is you kind of always want sentiment to overrule what the actual rules are. And nobody wants to hammer a club that's going through this. You don't want to, as I said earlier, kick them when they're down. But you also look at it and go, well, if they did it to Yeovil, they kind of have to do it again, because they've set a precedent. That whether that precedent was right or wrong, I don't know. I actually read a piece today about the Yeovil situation, just to jog my memory, and Kelly Simmons was quoted in that as saying that even just the intent to enter administration triggered their insolvency regulations. I don't know if their insolvency regulations have changed, but if they haven't, you can only imagine that showing the intent to enter liquidation triggers an insolvency event as well, unless the rules have changed. So, no, you don't want to hammer a club. You really don't. They've been through enough the last few weeks. The last thing they need is to find out they've got 10 points deducted and that relegation is staring them in the face. But a rule is a rule, and you have to be fair to everyone, because there'd be a lot of people at Yeovil, like I said, that would probably be on the phone to the FA saying, hang on a minute, you killed us off essentially 3 years ago, by giving us that 10-point deduction. So it's a really difficult one. But I'd hate to be the person making that decision, because sentimentally, you'd never want to hammer a club that's almost literally disappeared from existence. But there will be rules in place. Look, the FA will look at it. If the rules have changed, then maybe they've got a case to appeal. Like Tom said, there seems to be a bit of a 50-50 view. Some people think they've got a strong case that they could appeal it. Some people think it's almost nailed on. And that's kind of the same that I've heard. And again, comes back to what we said earlier. Nobody really knows at the moment. We need to know. But yeah, I just wanted to bring that up because, yeah, sentimentally, you just say, well, let them off. They've been through enough. Let them get on with it. But I'm sure someone like Watford as well, they'd probably be on the phone straight away saying, well, hang on a minute, and like you said, the other teams around them need to know as well. So, yeah, it's horrible. Again, don't envy that situation and whoever has to make that decision. But I think you have to follow the rules at the end of the day. And if that's harsh, then that's harsh. I wouldn't want that if it was my team, but we'll see what happens.
Matt, I know you want to jump in shortly, but if I could just lead you into this, and if you just want to give a bit of a response to what I'm about to say. We talked about money in the game, and we've seen Coventry struggle because it's like a separate club there, and you see like the likes of Man United, Man City, Chelsea, Tottenham, Arsenal at the top. The next tier there, the next tiers down, you got Wolverhampton Wanderers linked with a very strong men's team. What about like my club, Stourbridge, who I'm loving at the moment, doing absolutely everything perfectly well. Got some fantastic managers, fantastic structure. Got promoted last season. Potentially good, looking like they could get promoted this season. How about they keep on making small gains? Then all of a sudden they end up in the same league as Wolverhampton Wanderers, and then Wolves are just, because they're a bigger club, they just got that money to splash. Is that kind of fair that Wolves can always rely on that? Obviously, you can paint the picture in the WSL as well. Is it always fair that we've got that money as a club to kind of fall back on? Is that kind of fair? Because looking at it, it's not easy when there's two separate clubs, two separate teams. And this is what I was kind of alluding to before, with the strong getting stronger. It's is it fair that the lower teams, just because they haven't got that funding, they might be set up perfectly, but it's not right, is it? Not in that sense, at least.
I think for me, John, there's two ways to answer this, and it's sort of similar to what I touched on just before you both came in about. I believe that clubs should be, where they are on merit, through sort of on the field activities. I think the difficulty is with what you're saying is that it's hard because at times I look at it and I look at Chelsea and I just think they're buying up all these players similar to Man City, hoarding them, and then in my mind I'm thinking, are they doing this because they can so nobody else can get them? And part of me feels like, they've obviously got levels above our finance in terms of comparing to Man United. And that might be deemed not fair. And like you say, clubs like Stourbridge doing it properly. Like you said, let's say with Wolves, same league, and only one goes up. Let's assume that Wolves don't go up. Same league, and then like you say, Wolves can go out and buy whoever. But on the flip side, if you're a big club with that money, my argument would be, well, why should we? If our men's team is investing, why should we not throw money at it just to give everybody else a level playing field? So, in that respect, it is difficult and it is a minefield. The only solution to that would be something, and this could get sticky or like tricky, would be like a wage cap or a transfer cap. And I think then you've got to work out, and again, I don't want to go off on a mad one because this will be like another show, but then it becomes, what's deemed fair? Do you know what I mean? If there's a wage cap, are you penalising those clubs that do have the finance just to bring up other clubs to that level? Is it solely on the field, off the field? And I can see you sat there smiling, and I'll let Rich come in.
I'm also laughing at John Hume's comment as well. Is that a Man United fan?
I know, but to be fair, yeah, I get where John's coming from, but I try and look at it. I'm trying to sort of look at it at a balanced view and sort of avoid the Man United talk because it's easy as a fan, as we touched on before, sort of sentiment. But I think from a football point of view, like I say, I believe, and I'm sure others will, that football, as we know, is on the pitch. It should be on the pitch solely for where you are. It shouldn't be decided by. I mean, it is decided by finance because at the end of the day, like you said, tier 4? Yeah, tier 4 for Wolves can go out and buy whoever, and that'll be levels above Stourbridge. But so what you're saying is, them clubs with all the money, should they potentially be given, a cap, so to speak, if it is unfair? It's difficult.
Yeah, I think just for me on that one, just before we move on, because I know time's ticking.
We can let Rich jump in it as well, but go on.
Yeah, no, it's just I think the money. If you're at Man United, for example, and it's a very good club, I think the money should be spent on like looking after the players and all this kind of stuff. It shouldn't be a case of just like spending loads of money on top players or encourage. I think that needs to be.
Yeah, it's like football as a whole.
Yeah,
like facilities, etc. And yeah,
exactly. That's the way I'll be spending my money. But yeah, I'll over to you, Rich.
Rocky ground that.
Yeah, I agree with Matt. I think football it's weird because it's probably the most selfish sport in the world. Like everybody just thinks about themselves. Like we all come out in support in these moments, and as soon as the dust is settled and the games are back on, it'll be back to normal, and everyone fends for themselves because that's just how it works. And like you say, you can't really punish the teams that have the money. It's not their fault. Some of them have earned it. Some of them have looked into it, but they have it. So you can't punish them for that. It's frustrating because it is. It would probably benefit the team I work for if there was some kind of cap in the championship because we've fallen behind a little bit. But, that's not the other club's fault. They've got this investment and they've made decisions to go full time and fair play to them. So, it's frustrating, but it is what it is. There's people in the world that can go out and buy 10 mansions in Beverly Hills. Well, I can't even go out and buy one, but that's not their fault. Do you know what I mean? Like it's the way the world is. There's always going to be rich and there's always going to be poor. And yeah, it's frustrating. You say about Stourbridge, and obviously we went down there before Christmas and it was great. I love games like that, and I love the FA Cup for that reason. Because you get to go to new places and you get to go to these smaller clubs and sort of experience things a little bit differently. But you're right, they're kind of doing everything they can and they've got a good setup and, they were good against us, to be fair. But, yeah, they'll probably never reach the top because they don't have the money. And, yeah, it's cruel in a way, but it's a little bit brutal, but it's how the world is. It's certainly how football is. Everyone's so if Emma Hayes can go out and get another world-class striker to stop someone else getting them, why should she care? I remember we asked her a few years ago when they had Carly Telford and Hedvig Lindahl, and halfway through the season she signed Ann-Katrin Berger, and people said, well, how are you going to keep those three happy? Like, why have you got three top-class goalkeepers? And she went, it's not my problem. That was the answer, and it's not. It's not her problem. If the other teams wanted the goalkeeper, they should have put more money up. So, everybody looks after themselves in football. And, that's the situation now with these contracts, isn't it? People are looking at what can I get the best move? Where can I get the most money? You know, can I get to the WSL? And you know, everybody looks after themselves, and that's the way the world is. And yeah, like I said, it's definitely how football is. So yeah, I don't think you can put a cap on it. I think we're well past that now. I think it's maybe something we could have looked at 10 years ago before things got out of control a little bit. But now that clubs can essentially go and do what they want, and you've got men's clubs pumping money into some of the women's teams, I think you just got to let it run its course now, and you trust that teams do it sensibly, and the ones that don't, they'll get their comeuppance.
Matt, just before you finish the show, Catherine, massive fan of the show, and thank you for your question. I know you'll be back on the show again soon. I'll just ask Rich this question before Matt finishes up. Is it fair to restrict women's sides to allow a chance to smaller clubs that may not be able to compete at the top level from a financial perspective when this was never done at the men's clubs? I think it's a valid question. I think, Matt, we should do probably a full-on show based on this.
Ouch.
I know, yeah. We should do
Do you
want to just kind of like maybe just give your thoughts on that one very briefly there?
Yeah, I think you could do a full show on a lot of things in women's football.
Yeah.
No, is the Catherine's right. You can't, and I wouldn't want to. Like you say, it's happened in the men's game where you can look at it in a way and go, okay, it's gone way too far in the men's game, and for that reason, maybe you should in the women's game. But like you say, clubs are finding ways around it because there's money being pumped in, from the men's sides to the women's teams, which is how they're sort of circumventing these wage caps that are in there. And, you can only spend a certain amount of your, the money that you've got. But once a men's club goes and pumps $1 million in, that's it. You can get around it that way. So, no, you can't. It's not fair to. And we fought for a long time to grow this sport so that players can earn full-time contracts and not have to work outside football and all the things that go with that. And, as soon as we get it, we can't just say, well, let's take it away and everybody goes back part-time and they have to start working again. We don't want that. So we want the in-between. And that all comes back to what's going on with Coventry. You want players to be full-time, and there's a lot of players at Coventry this season that are full-time for the first time, and it's great. It's what you want, but you don't want it to go the other way where they then lose that. If we could have 20, 30, 40 sustainable full-time clubs in women's football, happy days. But it's up to the clubs, Like you say, at the very top level, they can afford to lose a few $100,000 a year. It's not an issue. Not an issue to Chelsea and United and City, etc. But it is an issue to teams in the Championship and below. But we can say the FA need to do this and we all need to do that, but it's got to be on each individual club. They know their own finances. They know what they've got. If they choose to take the risk and spend more, and if they get to the WSL and they make it back, fair play, you get away with the gamble. I saw someone in the comment earlier saying football's a gamble. It is. You're not always going to get away with it. And clubs have done that over the years where they spent too much. So, we can all sit here and say, let's do this, let's do that. It has to be on the clubs. Each individual club has to look after itself and know its own finances. And if everybody does that, we'll have a good, progressive game that's growing. And if those that don't, then we're going to have more situations like this, even though this is not necessarily down to Coventry. The whole process of who's involved and where the money is, needs to be tighter. And I think, like I said at the start, it just needs to be a bit of a wake-up call, I think, for some people. But no, you can't restrict it. We're past that now, and it's helping the game grow in many ways. So here to that, and like I said, we just need clubs to be sensible.
Yeah, spot on. John, just before we wrap, I've just got a couple of little bits to shout out. I'll start with that, actually. Yeah, thank you to everybody for tuning in. Thank you, obviously, to the pair of you for joining me, and obviously thank you to Tom, Gareth, and Paul as well. It's been a fantastic show. We don't usually do 2-hour specials. We don't usually throw on something sort of on a Wednesday, but I think, such was the situation and the interest, that we felt it was, a necessary talking point. I want to shout out Lewis Taylor, obviously prospective new owner of Coventry, and I'm sure on behalf of everybody, that's been on the show tonight, and obviously fellow football fans. We do wish him and Coventry United all the best. I also think it's important to shout out Michael Morgan as well. He set up the fundraiser. It's currently at 14,400. What they have done, obviously, reached the target of 10,000. They did tweet before that they were going to close it this weekend, close it early. If they could reach at least 15k, and that's not him saying that, that's me saying it'd be great if they can reach 15k. They're not far off that. If they could reach that before the weekend, that'd be brilliant. And obviously, I know that's going personally to sort of players and staff of Coventry as well. So we wish them all the best with that fundraising. Like I say, still time to donate for those that haven't. If you're able to donate, obviously, I appreciate it's a difficult sort of time of year after Christmas. We'll add in the link as well. Obviously, we'll tweet it out on All for United. One final thing as well is obviously Paul mentioned it before about sort of a fans collective page, Twitter page set up, and that is at FAWC fans. So for those that haven't followed that or you want to get involved or know what it's about, it's like Paul said, it's bringing fans together of clubs in Tier 2 in the Women's Championship to try and help, protect and promote the women's game and bounce ideas. So yeah, give those guys a follow as well. Like I say, thank you to everybody that's tuned in, that stuck with us for 2 hours. Thank you to everybody that's come in the comments, and also a big thank you to the wider football world and community for obviously highlighting the need. I don't think I can recall a bigger backlash, and rightly so, or a bigger amount of talking points than this that's actually saved the club. I don't think it's ever led to a club actually being taken over last minute from potential liquidation. So that in my view is job well done. Is there anything from you, John, before I click end?
No, I think just credit to you there, Matt, for putting a show together with some great guests at like short notice as well. So if you've enjoyed this show, tell all your friends, retweet it, share it, whatever you want to do, and get the word out there. Absolutely.
Yeah, brilliant. And that's all. Obviously, like I mentioned, fundraising link we'll add the link to this show as well for those that haven't watched it back. Hit the retweets, hit the likes, donate where possible, and we will see you. You're back tomorrow, John?
Yeah, back tomorrow. What day is it? Thursday. Yeah. So we'll have a show Thursday, Friday, and Benny's back as well on Thursday, and he's back on Saturday as well, isn't he?
Yeah, Saturday we're going to have to rework what we had planned because we had a West Ham preview and it's not happening now. so we'll think of something. There will be a show Saturday at 7:30. We just don't know what now, but we'll get our thinking caps on anyway. And then obviously Sunday there is some match day content coming anyway, regardless of obviously no Man United game. So yeah, Stourbridge for you, FC for me. So yeah, well, that's all from us. So take care, and we will see you all tomorrow's show with John and Ben. Cheers.